Hello and welcome to Essentials to Heal Yourself. I'm Laura Lee Humphreys. So with today's episode, then we're beginning a whole new series that's all focused on explaining to you the natural laws of health. Now, I know this concept may be somewhat new to you, or you may think, well, what does natural laws have to do with health? Well, that's what this series is all about. I'm going to break them all down individually. There's 7 of them. So the way we have been conditioned and trained in our society is to ignore natural laws of health. Hence, we don't know about them. We have a hard time recognizing them. And then we have this idea that when we do hear them, then we can just brush them off because, oh, they don't pertain to me. I'm immune to them. I'm the exception to the rule, when nothing could be further from the truth. And actually, such a statement only exposes the individual's ignorance and even arrogance to believe that natural laws don't have any influence on them or that they're immune to them. So let me give you an example of what a natural law is, because when you hear about them, then you're like, well, this is so vague. Laura Lee, what are they? And yet when you see them in action, then it's like, well, duh. That's what I call the duh factor. Once you recognize them and it's like, well, duh, it's so plain as day right in front of your face. And that's one of the things that makes us trip over them, because they are so obvious and in our face. Okay, so for example, gravity, that's a natural law. When you drop something off of a counter, then it falls to the floor. When you drop, you fall to the ground. Okay, that's a duh factor because everybody knows that's what happens. That's a law of gravity in action. Okay, so when it comes to the natural laws of health, there's that same type of a thing. For example, moving your body, that's a duh factor, and yet that's so critical to health. Eating real food, that's a duh factor, and yet that's what precipitates whether or not we get ill or not. One of the big factors. Water, we don't live without water, duh. So they're natural laws of health that show us how to care for ourselves, how the body functions. Okay, so how did we get so far off track? How did we get to the point today where we don't even want to acknowledge that there are natural laws that exist and that we are governed by them, that our bodies are governed by them, the fact that we are energetic beings, that we have energy systems, and those energy systems that we are is also governed by natural law? How did we get so far off track? Well, we have to go back to about 1910, over 100 years ago, with a thing called the Flexnor report. That's what changed everything. So this report was written by a man named Abraham Flexnor. He was not a doctor. He was not a scientist. He was not a healer. He was an academic, a school teacher, and an educational therapist. Or theorist, not a therapist. He studied educational theory. And he really liked the German approach to how they studied and taught medicine at that time. And we're talking before World War I, so it's quite a while ago. So he lived in Louisville, Kentucky. And he wrote this paper that offered a lot of suggestions. And it was called The Medical Education in the United States and Canada. And that changed everything about how medical schools functioned. Now, he was buddies and rubbed shoulders with a lot of the big bankers, the big industrialists of the time, the central bankers, families like the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, Rothschilds. So anytime you run into people who are buddy with these Illuminati families, which is what they are, central bank families, the families that own the system of the central banks, and that were globalists, that were industrialists back in the day, that tells you there's a big red flag coming, or that it is a big red flag, because it also says that there's disaster coming. Anytime those people do anything in business or anything, it only benefits them at the expense of the rest of humanity. So just be aware of that. So anytime you see this happening, then you know that a disaster is on its way. And it was definitely the case here. So back in the day, in that time, then the petroleum industry, the big oil industry, was just getting started. And in the process of oil refining, then there was, crude oil or runoff or excess material. That is the material that was used to start forming drugs. Hence the birth of the pharmaceutical industry. Not a good thing to be putting petroleum-based things in your body. That's poison. Okay. However, the result of the Flexnor report, buddying up to the central banking families and the families that were running the budding oil industries, they wanted to see how they could develop this budding industry of pharmaceuticals, chemical-based drugs, petroleum-based drugs. And so they did this thing with the Flexnor report, which changed how the schools taught medicine. So at the time in the country, there was about 148 medical schools. And after the repercussions of this Flexnor report went across the country, there was about 66 schools left. What they instituted in all of the medical schools was that they had to change their, quote, standards of how they taught medicine to make it to what it is today, which is pushing the biomedical model, like the scientific study research model, and using clinical partnering with other hospitals for clinical training, and doing a lot of the research to develop the budding drugs and pharmaceuticals to see how they could be used in the medical industry. So all of the medical schools that taught the allopathic medical model, which is what this is, based on drug medicine, they received grants, political favors, money from the government, money for the research, and they took all of the medical schools, quote, under their wing. So what you find today are all of the medical schools are either owned by the owned and run by either a government institution, a nonprofit institution, the state. It's all controlled by the government, and especially the curriculum is controlled by the government now. And that was because of what the Flexnor report did. So why is this a disaster? Well, I said that there was about 148 medical schools that after this change happened, there were only 66 left. So what happened to over 100 of them, or almost 100 of them? They were shut down. And what were those schools teaching? Holistic natural medicine, homeopathy, chiropractic, naturopathic, natural medicine, natural healing, herbology, midwifery, massage, things that had been done forever and ever and ever in every culture on the globe. So essentially what this change did with all the medical schools was that it took away the competition. It put them out of business because these schools were for-profit businesses. The people owning them, running them, were the ones that made profit. I mean, that was their living, that was their business. So if they could not get government funding or all these grants, then they immediately got put out of business. And the Flexnor report put in all of this criteria, all of these control mechanisms and requirements that now all of the medical schools had to do, all these hoops they had to jump through. And if they didn't do those hoops, then they got shut down because they wouldn't get funding. They couldn't stay in business. And with all of these natural or schools that taught natural medicine, they're not going to advocate drug, petroleum-based poisons to be part of their medical practice. Duh. It's a completely different paradigm and thought process and priority. And so one by one, they got put out of business. They got discredited. Anything having to do with natural health, natural healing, holistic anything got shamed, trying to shoved under the rug, discredited, trying to ignore, trying to stamp out of existence natural medicine and ways of doing things that people had been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, because they only wanted to have one sole option available. They only wanted to acknowledge that there's only one thing that could possibly exist, and it was their system of allopathic medicine based on petroleum-based drugs, which are poison. And to only have what has become known as the scientific model, where you have to have this triple-blind, placebo control, scientific nonsense to prove anything. And that if something has to go through all of that rigorous study in order to be claimed, quote, legitimate. Which, granted, there's lots of things that can be of benefit from this system, and at the same time, you cannot ignore and pretend that all of this other evidence and history doesn't exist just because you don't like what it says. That's what's happened. And so now we come to now, 100 years later, over 100 years later, we've got this behemoth of the medical industry that's imploding on itself, most literally. It's corrupt as anything. The values are all for profit, greed, control. And for the most part, medicine has become completely stone deaf and completely ignored. The oath that they took to, quote, be a doctor or be a healer or a helper of people, and that is the Hippocratic Oath, to do no harm. And yet you can look around and there's oodles and oodles and oodles of evidence within that medical system where that Hippocratic Oath has been just flushed down the toilet. I mean, all you have to do is look to see how they've treated people in the last 3 years when they got, quote, respiratory illnesses, and they got put into these special wards and given remdesivir, and a few days later they were dead. Go look it up. So the medical industrial complex has become one that's only interested in the profit, the greed, the control, at the expense of whole body health, an understanding of holistic principles, understanding of the natural laws of health, of understanding what you need to do to take care of yourself, to understand how your body functions. All of that has been lost because of how the medical industry has evolved over the last 100 years as a result of the Flexnor report of 1910. So that's why we are in the mess that we are in. Lovely, isn't it? So, where does that leave you today? You have a couple of choices. You can either continue going on, doing what you've done always, what your parents have taught you, and what the schools and education and the media and on have taught you to stay within the system of the allopathic medical model. Or you can decide to educate yourself. If you're tired of the results that you have been given and getting in that system, where you're only getting sicker, you're only having to get more and more prescription drugs, where you have more and more aches and pains, where you have to take more drugs to cover up the symptoms from the previous drugs, where you've experienced botched surgeries, medical expenses that are through the roof that are bankrupting you, you can continue experiencing all those results, all that misery, all that pain. Or you can choose to take some personal responsibility to educate yourself on things like the natural laws of health, to learn how to take care of yourself and learn how to apply these principles of how to care for your body that people in all ages, all cultures, forever and ever have always known and always done, with the exception of the last 100 years with this allopathic medical model. And thankfully, in the last 2 or 3 decades, more and more people are calling the scam for what it is. They're tired of the pain and the anguish and the expense, and they've learned to do something else. They've learned to apply and learn and educate themselves on natural healing, holistic principles of health, and live them and experience the inevitable consequences and results of living in harmony with natural law, because that's exactly what we're talking about here. When you do not follow natural law, you will experience the inevitable results, which are blatantly seen in the medical model currently, of the pain, the anguish, the increase in sickness, in obesity, of people not feeling worse and worse and worse, more and more drugs, costs going through the roof. That is a blatant demonstration of what happens when you knowingly, well, maybe not necessarily knowingly, but when you do not follow, do not respect natural law. There are consequences. So it's up to you. All right, so with that said, this is the introduction to this series, so I hope you enjoy it. Please be watching for the next episodes where I will be breaking down one at a time the natural laws of health to educate you so that you can take back your power, decide to pick up your personal responsibility and take it back from the medical industry. It's yours. Stop giving it away. Learn how to take care of yourself in a way that will produce beneficial results so that you can get out of pain and anguish and suffering, so that you can get rid of the 20 medications that you have to take or that you're told you have to take, that you can correct the problems that have resulted from not following the natural laws of health and following people who you put up to be as authorities who themselves don't know the natural laws of health. Okay, so with that, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And as always, I have a freebie download for you, a gift in all of my podcast episodes. And this one is about the 7 unconscious beliefs that prevent you from healing. So I encourage you to grab that. The link to do so will be down in the description with this episode, and that will introduce you to some of the things that we have been conditioned to believe that prevent us from recognizing and following things like the natural laws of health. So we can confront these beliefs and social conditionings that we've all been programmed with and see them for what they are, then you can start dismantling them within your own mind so that you can begin to move away from the things that are causing you harm, the things that are poisoning you and making you sick, and instead move towards the things that will heal you and empower you to know that you have within you the skills and the ability to heal yourself. That's what this is all about. So thanks for tuning in. Take care, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks.